The woman they escorted out of the building at 8:14 a.m. on a Thursday carried her mop bucket in her left hand and a plastic bag in her right. Security did not touch her. They did not need to. She walked ahead of them through the glass lobby of Meridian Capital Group on Victoria Island, Lagos, in her blue uniform and her white rubber shoes, and she did not look back once. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Blessing, who had never once spoken to her, watched her go. Blessing reached for her phone. She had already decided what to caption the video. The woman in the blue uniform descended the 3 steps to the car park, placed her mop bucket beside the gutter, and stood very still for a moment in the early morning air. She looked at the building. She set the plastic bag down. Then she reached into the pocket of her uniform and pressed something small and flat between her thumb and her first 2 fingers, the way a person holds something they were told to let go of, but cannot. What was inside that plastic bag would take 48 hours to become the most discussed item in the building, and what was inside that pocket was the reason why. Her name was Constance Abena Owusu Boateng. She was 53 years old, and she weighed 59 kilograms, which was less than she had weighed at 40, because the hours had been long for 11 years, and she had learned to eat once a day on days when the commute from Motion to Victoria Island took more than 90 minutes, which was most days. She had a daughter in secondary school in Ibadan, and a sister in Accra who called every Sunday, and a landlord in Mushin who had raised the rent twice in 3 years. She had owned a single blue uniform for work, not this one. This one was 9 months old, and had owned another before it for the previous 10 years. She washed her uniform every night in the bathroom sink with Omo powder and hung it on the wire rack behind the door, and in the morning it was dry enough. The uniform was always clean. This was the thing people noticed about her first. Even if they noticed little else, her uniform was always clean. She had started at Meridian Capital Group in January of 2013, 11 years before a man named Gerald Obinna Adeyemi Bright decided she was no longer needed. Gerald was 41 years old, newly appointed as operations director, and he had arrived with what he called a comprehensive facilities audit. The audit had produced a list. The list had 15 names on it. Constance Abena Owusu Boateng was named number 7. Gerald had not spoken to her directly before the morning of the audit. He had walked past her twice in 11 years, once in the 4th floor corridor during a weekend shift, and once near the supply closet on 2. And on both occasions, he had not registered her face. He registered the mop. He registered the blue uniform. He had not registered the face. The morning Gerald read his list to the head of HR, a woman named Mrs. Pauline Nwosu, he was told that most of the names were long-serving staff. He said that long service was not the same as essential service. Mrs. Nwosu wrote his words down. She had written down a great many things in her 15 years at Meridian, and she had learned that the things she wrote down often became important at a later date. Long service is not the same as essential service. She underlined it. The letter arrived at 7:45 a.m. on Thursday. It was placed in Constance's locker by a junior HR assistant named Toby, who had been told to do it quickly and not discuss it. The letter said, "Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated as part of a facilities restructuring initiative." It said, "All personal items must be removed from the premises by 9 a.m. It said, "A prorated final payment for the remainder of the quarter would be processed within 14 to 21 working days." Constance read it twice, standing at her locker in her blue uniform, holding her mop handle with her right hand. She folded the letter along its original creases. She put it in the plastic bag she used to carry her lunch. Then she picked up the small framed photograph that had been on the inside shelf of her locker since 2014, pressed it flat against her chest for a moment, and placed that in the bag too. The photograph was of a man standing in front of a building. The building in the photograph was this building. The man in the photograph was not Gerald Adeyemi Bright. She did not cry. She did not ask to speak to anyone. She went to the storage room on the first floor and retrieved her mop bucket, and she carried it out through the lobby at 8:14 a.m. with security trailing behind her at a respectful distance, because Mrs. Nwosu had said specifically, respectful distance. When she reached the car park, she pressed that small flat thing between her fingers and stood looking at the glass face of Meridian Capital Group for 43 seconds. Then, she called a number she had not called in 4 years. It rang 3 times. A man answered. She said only 4 words. She said, "It is time, Emmanuel." She picked up the plastic bag, left the mop bucket beside the gutter because she had no use for it now, and walked to the bus stop on Ozumba Mbadiwe Avenue. If this story is hitting you the way I think it is, subscribe. Because what happens in the next 48 hours is something Gerald Adeyemi Bright would have given everything he owned to undo. The building that Constance had cleaned for 11 years had been built in 2007 on a parcel of land on Victoria Island that at the time was considered secondary real estate. The man who built it was named Kwadwo Owusu Boateng. He had died in 2019 of a stroke in Accra, and he had died quietly, which was the way he had preferred to do most things. Kwadwo Owusu Boateng had started his business in a room in motion with a telephone and a handwritten ledger. And by the time he built the glass building on Victoria Island, he had been in financial services for 22 years and had never once lost a client he wanted to keep. He had married once. He had a daughter in secondary school in Ibadan, which at the time of his death was finishing her wake exams, and he had a sister in Accra who called every Sunday. He also had a will, written and registered in Lagos in 2018, witnessed by 2 people, and filed with a firm of solicitors on Ideo Street called Mensa and Associates. The will had never been contested because the people who would have contested it had not known it existed. The solicitors at Mensa and Associates had known it existed. They had been waiting for a particular event before they were required to act. The particular event was the termination of the employment of Constance Abina Owusu Boateng from Meridian Capital Group. This was the event that had been specified by Kwadwo Owusu Boateng himself, in writing, in 2018. As the trigger. Kwadwo's reasoning, laid out in 2 handwritten pages attached to the will, had been this. Constance had chosen to work at the company he built rather than take any of the arrangements he had offered. She had chosen this. He had never been able to change her mind, which was something he had found equal parts maddening and admirable, because it was the same quality that had made her a remarkable businesswoman in her own right before the agreement that had made it necessary to be careful. He had made provisions, accordingly. He had made them in a way that would only activate when she was no longer able to make the choice herself. Emmanuel Mensah, who was 68 years old and had been a solicitor for 39 of those years, took the call from Constance at 8:26 a.m. on Thursday. He was sitting in his office on Idejo Street with the file open on his desk. He had kept it on his desk for 4 years, since Kwadwo died, and he had known the call would come eventually. He said, "I will need 3 days to prepare the documentation." She said that was fine. He said, "Do you want me to send a letter first or file directly?" She said, "File directly." He closed the file and asked his assistant to cancel his afternoon appointments. On Thursday evening, 2 days after Constance walked out of the building with her mop bucket and her plastic bag, a courier arrived at Meridian Capital Group with a sealed envelope addressed to the chairman of the board of directors, Chief Danjuma Adeyemi. The envelope contained a 22-page document. The document was a notification of shareholder status and a formal request for a board meeting within 5 business days. The document established, with full supporting evidence and certified copies of the original 2008 shareholders' agreement, that Constance Abina Owusu Boateng held, in trust, a 48.5% equity stake in Meridian Capital Group. A stake that had been structured, legally and specifically, to carry full voting rights and full dividend entitlements, and which had been dormant but entirely intact for 11 years. Blessing, the receptionist, did not post her video. She had watched the courier come in. She had seen the expression on the face of the chairman's personal assistant when the assistant emerged from the lift 20 minutes after accepting the envelope, walked directly to the reception desk, and asked, without making eye contact with Blessing, for the personnel file of Constance Abina Owusu Boateng. Blessing deleted the video from her phone. She did not tell anyone she had taken it. Mrs. Pauline Nwosu received a call at home on Thursday evening. She had been expecting it. She went to her study, took the notebook she had been keeping since 2009 from the drawer where it lived, and found the entry from 2013, the date Constance had started, the date Mrs. Nwosu had noticed the name on the application form, the date she had called the solicitors at Mensa and Associates simply to ask, professionally, quietly, whether the name was significant. The solicitors had told her, professionally and quietly, that they could not comment. Mrs. Nwosu had written that response down too. She had underlined it. She found the notebook, and she held it in both hands, and sat for a moment in the silence of her study and thought about the 11 years of small decisions she had made, the respectful distances she had asked for, the letters she had kept copies of, the words she had underlined. Then she called her lawyer. Gerald Adeyemi Bright was in a meeting on Friday morning when the chairman's assistant came to the door. The assistant did not knock. She opened the door, looked at Gerald, and said, very quietly, "Chief would like you in the boardroom now." Gerald looked at the 5 people sitting around the table. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He left the room. The 5 people at the table looked at the door, and then at each other. And no one said anything. The boardroom at Meridian Capital Group was on the 14th floor, and it had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked over Lagos Harbor. Chief Danjuma Adeyemi was sitting at the head of the table when Gerald walked in. Emmanuel Mensah was sitting to the chief's left. A woman Gerald had never seen before was sitting to the chief's right. She was wearing a white kaftan, and she was looking at something on the table in front of her. Gerald sat down across from Emmanuel Mensah and put his hands flat on the table and waited. Chief Adeyemi said, "Close the door, please." The assistant closed it from outside. Chief Adeyemi said, "Gerald, this is Funmi Akebe. She is the legal director at Mensa and Associates." He said, "I think you may have some idea why she is here." Gerald said he was not sure. Chief Adeyemi looked at him for a moment. He was 66 years old and had run Meridian Capital Group for 22 years, and he had seen a great many kinds of certainty in that boardroom, and he found that the kind that said it was not sure was usually the most certain of all. He said, "Funmi, please." Funmi Akebe had been a legal director for 14 years. She had never once raised her voice in a boardroom. She placed 3 copies of the 22-page document on the table. She said, "On Thursday, the 8th of February, you authorized the termination of Miss Constance Owusu Boateng's employment at this company." She said, I am here to inform the board that Miss Owusu Boateng holds, per the original shareholders' agreement signed by Mr. Kwadwo Owusu Boateng in 2008, a 48.5% equity stake in this company. That stake includes full voting rights. It has been in dormancy by Miss Owusu Boateng's personal election for the past 11 years, she said. The dormancy agreement contained one activation clause. That clause was your termination letter. She folded her hands on the table. You activated it on Thursday morning at 7:45 a.m. Gerald's hand was on the table. It stayed on the table. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Chief Adeyemi. Chief Adeyemi did not look back. Emmanuel Mensah placed an additional document in front of Gerald. It was a copy of Kwadwo Owusu Boateng's 2 handwritten pages. Emmanuel said, very gently, Mr. Kwadwo wanted this to remain voluntary. He set the arrangement in such a way that only an involuntary departure would activate the trust. His intention was to allow Constance the dignity of her own choice for as long as she wished to make it. Gerald looked at the handwriting. He recognized something in it, though he could not say what. The deliberateness of it, perhaps, the care. He trusted that if she was ever removed against her will, Emmanuel continued, it would mean the company was no longer being run in the spirit he intended. He paused. He was frequently right about things. Constance arrived at the Meridian Capital Group building at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, 6 days after she had left it with her mop bucket. She came in a gray Toyota Camry, driven by a man who was not a driver, but was Emmanuel Mensah's associate. She was wearing the same white kaftan she had worn to the board meeting on Friday. She was not wearing the blue uniform. She carried a single bag, a tan leather bag, old but well kept, with brass clasps that had been polished recently, that had belonged to her husband's mother and had been made in Kumasi in 1991. She pressed it against her side as the car pulled into the car park. She looked at the building. She said nothing. The glass lobby at Meridian Capital Group on Victoria Island, Lagos, looked the same as it had looked at 8:14 a.m. 6 days earlier, except that Gerald Adeyemi Bright was no longer in the building. His name had been removed from the 4th floor directory that same Tuesday morning. Mrs. Pauline Nwosu was standing near the reception desk when Constance walked through the front door. Blessing was at her desk. Blessing was looking at the desk and not at the lobby. Mrs. Nwosu walked toward Constance and stopped 2 feet from her and said, "Welcome back." She said nothing else. Constance looked at her. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once, the way a person nods when words would use more than the moment has. They rode the lift to the 14th floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed Lagos Harbor in the late morning light. The table in the boardroom had been cleared and reset. Chief Adeyemi was already there, along with 3 other board members, and Funmi Akebe and Emmanuel Mensah. The chair to the chief's right had been left empty. Constance sat down in it and placed the tan leather bag on the table in front of her. She reached into the bag and took out the framed photograph, the one from the inside shelf of her locker, the man standing in front of a building that was this building, and set it on the table facing her. She looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she looked at the board. She said, "My husband built this company. I was there the night he signed the first lease on this land, and I was there the night he signed the first client. I mopped the floors of this building for 11 years because it was the only way I could be close to something of his without anyone asking me what I was doing here." Her voice did not change register. "I need you to understand that I am not here for revenge. I am here because someone decided I was no longer visible. And when you become invisible in the place your husband built with his hands, you have to make a decision. She paused. I have made mine. The board meeting ran for 4 hours and 17 minutes. Constance spoke for most of them. She had been listening for 11 years. She had cleaned the meeting rooms after the late sessions, and she had learned the sound of the building, the things it needed, and the things it had been given instead, the places where the decisions had been sound, and the places where they had not. She spoke with the specificity of someone who had watched from a position where no one thought to adjust their behavior because of her presence. She had seen everything. The first decision the board ratified with Constance present was a new facilities policy. It was comprehensive. It established terms for all support staff, minimum wage floors indexed to inflation, annual review requirements, a formal grievance process with external oversight, and a mandate that all management personnel completed Dignity in the Workplace certification within 90 days. The certification would be held in the Meridian Capital Group building. It would be facilitated by an external firm. The first session was scheduled for the exact date that Gerald Adeyemi Bright had handed his list of 15 names to Mrs. Pauline Nwosu. Constance had asked for that date specifically. When Funmi Achebe asked why that date, Constance said, "So that the building remembers." Funmi Achebe wrote it down. In the months that followed, a great many things changed at Meridian Capital Group, and very few of them were announced. The things that were announced were the second quarter results, which were the strongest in the company's history, and the appointment of a new chief operating officer, who had a background in organizational transformation and had worked previously in Accra and London and Abuja. The things that were not announced were quieter and more durable. The supply room on the second floor was reorganized according to a system that Constance had designed, which turned out to reduce restocking time by 34%. 3 members of the facilities team were enrolled in evening courses at a technical college in Yaba, the fees for which were covered by a new staff development fund that had not existed in January. The 4 people whose names had been beside Constance's on Gerald's original list were reinstated with back pay. Mrs. Pauline Nwosu was offered a promotion. She asked for a day to think about it. The next morning she brought in the notebook. She handed it to Constance. She said, "I kept records." Constance turned the notebook over in her hands. She read a few pages. She looked at the date of the first entry. She said, 11 years. Mrs. Nwosu said, "I didn't know who you were. I just thought someone should be keeping track." Constance held the notebook for a moment longer. Then she handed it back. She said, "Keep it." And yes. The promotion. What Kwadwo Owusu Boateng understood. What he wrote in 2 handwritten pages attached to a legal document, and then let sit inside a filing cabinet on Idejo Street for 11 years, was this: there are people who build things quietly. They build with their hands, or their mind, or their years, or their silence, and the world moves around them the way water moves around a stone, registering only the surface and never the weight. He had watched his wife do this her entire life. He had watched her build. He had watched her be overlooked. He had watched her hold herself, precisely, carefully, with the quality that is not pride, but is something older than pride, in rooms where no one had made space for her. He had known, in the particular way that people know things about the person they have loved the longest, that she was not going to stop holding herself that way simply because a room changed shape. So, he had built the room for her. He had built it quietly, the way she would have built it. He had left it in the hands of a solicitor and trusted time to do the rest. Gerald Adeyemi Bright had signed a termination letter for a woman in a blue uniform with a mop bucket. He had activated 11 years of stillness. He had done, in 4 words on a standard HR form, position eliminated, effective immediately, what Kwadwo Owusu Boateng had spent 12 years trying not to force her to do. The night they escorted Constance Abena Owusu Boateng out of that glass lobby. She went home on the bus from Ozumba Mbadiwe Avenue. She sat by the window and she pressed that small flat thing between her fingers. It was the brass clasp from her husband's mother's bag. She had kept it in her pocket for 4 years, since the day Kwadwo died, and she had taken the bag from the shelf where it had always sat. She had carried it to work every morning in the pocket of her blue uniform, inside the building her husband had built, and pressed it between her fingers on the days when the building felt like it needed her to remember. She got off the bus in Mushin. She called her daughter. Her daughter answered on the first ring. Constance said, "I need to tell you something about your father." She sat down on the step outside her door. She held the clasp. She talked for a long time in the warm Lagos evening while her daughter listened from Ibadan, and what she said was not about equity stakes or board meetings or 22-page legal documents. What she said was about a man she had known for 31 years, who had built something quietly and left it where it would be found, and about the kind of love that does not announce itself, but waits, patiently, legally, fully intact, for the moment when you need it most. There are people in your life right now who have been in rooms where no one made space for them. They have been cleaning things, holding things, remembering things, carrying things in their pockets. For years. The world looks at the surface. It looks at the uniform, the shoes, the plastic bag, the number on the door. It does not look at what is carried. It cannot see what has been building. The ones who are easiest to overlook are often the ones who have been here longest. The ones who stay quiet are often the ones who know the most. And the people who believe they are handing someone an ending are almost always, without knowing it, handing them a key. Constance Abena Owusu Boateng still has the photograph of her husband on her desk. The 14th floor. The window that looks over Lagos Harbor. The man in the photograph is standing in front of the building that she now chairs. The building looks the same from the outside, but the floors have been reorganized. Here is what I want you to sit with before you leave. If the person who had the most patience, the most knowledge, and the most right to speak in a room you were in had been silent, had been invisible, had stayed quiet for reasons of their own, would you have known? Would you have looked at the uniform and seen the person inside it? And if you are the one who has been carrying something quietly, in a pocket, through the long commute, through the years where no one asked, what is it that is waiting to be activated? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.